Welcome to another SAP Tech Bytes video where we are running through some of the SAP HANA Cloud and SAP Cloud Application Programming Model combined tutorials. This is the tutorial SAP HANA Cloud Create a User Interface with SAP Cloud Application Programming Model. In this particular tutorial, we are going to use the services based upon the SAP Cloud Application Programming Model Node.js flavor and use an SAP Fiori wizard to create a user interface. We will learn how to create a Fiori Freestyle web interface and how to configure the application router to be able to serve that. Now, this tutorial is once again designed for SAP HANA Cloud and does not match up to SAP HANA On-Premise or SAP HANA Express Edition. We are also assuming that you have created your database artifacts and loaded data in them as explained in the previous tutorial in this series. So to begin, we want start here at step 1, run the services. So we're going to start right with our project from the previous tutorial. And we already have all of our connection details to the HANA database. From when we did the bind operation, it wrote those connection details into this .env file. It's got the host name, the port, the username, and password that we can use to connect to the HDI container. We want this same information to now be available to the rest of our project so we can use it at the services layer as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to open a new terminal. So once again, get access to the shell. And I'm going to change directory into the DB folder. And this is where the env file is. And what we want to do is we want to copy this env file and reformat it so it is a default -env.json. And this is a file format, basically does the same thing that the env file does, but it will reformat it so it's usable by the Cloud Application Programming Model as well. And it can use this to test our services, but yet connect to our HANA database as we go. So we'll once again use the HANA CLI, and I'll just say HANA CLI, copy to default env, and it's going to copy that .env file and created a version of it that is default env.json, reformatted the content because it is a little different structural format, but otherwise we're good to go now. And what we want, this is in this DB folder, we don't need it there, we need to get this back to the root of the project. So let's just copy it down here. I want to go there. Not go where I think I wanted it to go. I did not put it in the... Nope. Oh, where did that go? There it is. It didn't copy and paste at all, or didn't move it at all. All right, so there we are. Just want to, yeah, there we are. Just want to move it into the root of the project. So now we see our default env right here alongside our MTA YAML and our package.json in the root of the project. That's what I wanted to try to get there. Oh, so not elegantly. Now we can go back to our terminal window, and I'm just going to go back up to the root of the project. And now if I do an npm install, this is going to install any of the prerequisites, which we had already done this in the earlier tutorial. I'm just kind of double checking you here to make sure you've got all the Node.js modules that you need installed here. But you can go ahead and run the command npm start. And what npm start is going to do, it's going to read your package.json, and it's going to run this start script, which is just cds run, that was put in here by the wizard. Of course, you could also just say cds run as well. But when I do npm start, It's starting the services layer. It's listening on a certain host here, but it's also connected to the HANA database. So it'll really be serving data out of our HANA database. At this point, we can go ahead and say open in new tab, and that will launch the Cloud Application Programming Model test tool, which from here we'll see our entities that we have exposed, mainly the header and items, which we defined, and then countries because it was a relational dependency to our entities, got auto-exposed by the Cloud Application Programming Model as well. And we can go ahead and click on something here, like I can click on Interactions Header, and that will run the OData service, and we see our 4 records being served out of the database. So we now know that we have connection to the OData service, just running. It wasn't deployed to Cloud Foundry, it's just running from the Cloud Shell inside the Business Application Studio, but let's just very quickly test, but really connect to the HANA database and get real data out of the HANA database for our test. Now that brings us to the end of step 1. For step 2, what we want to do is I want to just go back here to the little test tool again. I'm going to show you some of the other things that we can do. You can click on $metadata, and this is going to show you the OData metadata document. For instance, you can see we're in version 4, so we're running OData v4. So this is all the metadata, and we'll see later how things like even column descriptions and annotations can be added here in this metadata and used by Fiori automatically. The other thing I want to do is I want to show you we can go to the items view. Now, by default, it's showing us all the items. We can come up here to the URL, and we can just add a ampersand to add another search element. So I'm going to say $search equals DE. It's only going to pull out the records that have a DE somewhere in the content there. So it's done a search on the data. Now what we want to do in this next step is configure routing. Now you could just add a user interface to your project and it could be served out, CAP can serve it out via the app folder. But what we want to do is begin to prepare for more robust real authentication and real deployment kind of scenario where you either use a managed application router or a dedicated standalone application router for your application as a separate module. And in order to do this, we want to add an application router module to our project. It's going to become the entry point into our application, even for our services layer, because it's going to take care of all the authentication. And every request will come into this module and then be routed to various different back-end services. Now, what we want to do is, I'm just going to close a couple things here to maybe give me a little more space. I'm going to come here to I want to right mouse click on the MTA YAML file, and I'm going to say create MTA module from template. And this is going to use another wizard that's going to allow us to add an additional module to our project. And what I want to do here is I want to add an app router configuration to my existing project. So I'm just going to choose app router configuration, and I'm going to say start. And you have your choice of either the managed app router, which would be like deployed to the shared app router provided by the BTP platform itself, or we can do a standalone application router as a part of our application. I'm going to go ahead and do standalone application router. It's going to give us a little bit more control over the configuration and let us see how to do the routing and how to, and we'll be able to test run it locally as well. Do you want to add authentication? Yes, we are going to add authentication down the line. And do you plan to add a user interface? Yes, I do plan to add a user interface. That's a big part of why I'm doing this step. So I'll go ahead and run that. And what you will see is that once the wizard is done, is it has generated a folder here called My HANA App Router. and it has added that entry to the MTA YAML and done all the wiring and things necessary to add that application router and dependencies into our project. But we already had this app folder that would serve as an app router, and CAP would use automatically at test time as well. So what I really want to do here is I want to rename all this to just be app, so it all plays nicely together. So in order to do that, I'm just going to delete this empty app folder. And then I'm going to take this long name here, my HANA app router, and I'm going to just do a rename on it. I'm just going to rename it app. There we are. Now I'm back to the original content structure, but now I've got a full application router in my app folder. And the only other thing that we need to do is we need to make the same change here in the MTA YAML file. So I'll just do a I want to do a replace for everywhere that I find the old name, my HANA app router, and I want to replace that with just app. I'll do a replace all, which should just be the 2, which is the name of the module and then the path to the module. And now everything is in sync again with the new name. So let's save that. And I can close all this out. Now, the app router here has a little configuration file called xsapp.json. And it's empty for now, but we want to add some content to it. We want to add our first route so it knows how to get to our CAP service. So I'm just going to add a route here, and I'm going to say source. And it's going to be /catalog, and then I'm going to wildcard this. Star. So anything that comes in with a request path that starts with catalog, which is what our OData service expects, then I'm going to send it to a destination named SRV API. And I do want to turn on CSRF protection. And if we look here, this destination SRV API, that is defined in here, SRV API, as a provider, basically the exposure of our service, our service layer. So that's how that mapping is. Our app router will call over to the bound service there. All right. Well, we need to make a little change to the MTA YAML as well. We need to extend it. I'm going to do this using the MTA editor. So this is step 4, edit the deployment descriptor. And when an application is deployed, the MTA YAML file is used to establish all the dependencies between the modules and the resources. And environment variables such as the name of the destination get set. And although this might not be used at test time in the Business Application Studio, we want to go ahead and make sure our MTA YAML is all up to date so that when we deploy this for real, it's going to be good. So now that we have the MTA YAML open in the dedicated editor, if we look at our service module, we see that it has a provides and SRV API, and it has a property of SRV URL that will pass the generated URL for that service. So we're not hard coding any of the URLs. So just pointing out what I was showing you last time. But now what we want to do is we want to wire that up to the application router. So I'm going to go to the app router, and I'm going to go to the requires section of the app router, requires, and it is connected to a UAA resource. It's connected to the HTML repository. I'm going to go ahead and add another one here. another requires. And I'm just going to then choose it from the drop down and connect it to the SRV API provider. And that's what's going to wire the service, the OData service layer or service module to the application router. And it needs just a little bit of extra configuration here. We have to say destinations, and then we can add properties here for the destinations to say name, and it's going to be srv-api, and URL, and we're going to use the variable named srv URL that was exposed on the provider side. And we're going to say that we want to forward our auth token. Forward auth token true. And this tells it that when the application router generates an authorization token after it's authenticated the user, forward it into this module, so it won't have to do any authentication itself. It will get the authentication token and it can process it directly. We will save those changes, and now we have adjusted our MTA YAML as well. Now for step 5, to create a Fiori Freestyle web interface. We're going to create the Fiori Freestyle UI for our Cloud Application Programming Model service, and we're going to use the wizard to generate most of it for us. So from the menu up here, we can use the command palette by saying View, Find Command, and then just start typing Fiori, and I'm going to show you all the various Fiori tools and wizards that we have at our disposal. We're going to want to open the, let's see which one, Open Application Generator. Okay, yeah, make sure I got the right one. And this is starting the template wizard. And you can choose here between Fiori Elements or Fiori Freestyle. So we're going to go ahead and switch here to SAP UI5 Freestyle. But it would work the same way if we were doing Fiori Elements. I just want to show you this option. And we want to create a work list. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that floor plan. And then say Next. And it's saying, well, you know, what's the source of your service? So we can say use a local cap Node.js project, and then it's just going to read into our local project here. So let's tell it which project to go into. Yes, I want to look at my HANA app. That is my current project. So home user projects, my HANA app. That's my project. And it's saying OData service. Well, it saw one. So it read our project metadata and it could see that there was one service. So that's our catalog service. And we can go ahead and say next. And now we choose our individual entities. So what do we want? Our object collection. We're going to do a list of the items. The key is the header ID. The object ID is also the header ID. The object number is the header ID. We don't have a whole lot of columns. It wasn't a very big data model, but you know, you're getting to see the process without having to sit here and create tons of columns or data or things like that. So we kept it intentionally quite simple. So we'll go ahead and say next, and this brings us to the last step of the wizard, the project attributes. So what do we want our module name to be? Interaction items. Application title. This doesn't really matter. So whatever you want to appear on the screen. Interaction items list. I don't have to give it a namespace. For a description, I'm just going to give it the same as the title. Not getting really fancy here, are we? Add deployment configuration. No, I don't need to. Fiori Launchpad. We're not going to use that in this particular scenario, but you could add Fiori Launchpad configuration as well. Advanced options. Yeah, use the latest. I like the Quartz Dark. So, matter of a preference there, which theme you want to change. You can always change that later. Skip the generation of the association CDS file. We can always come back and add that manually if we want. And there we are. That takes us through the process. And I'm going to say finish. and it is generating the Fiori application. And what you're going to see here, give it just a second to finish installing all the dependencies here. There we are. It has created its own separate folder here in the root with its own package JSON, but then this web app within there for our content. Now, we have an application router, though, up here in the app folder. So what we want to do is we just want to take this interaction items and we want to go ahead and move it up here into the app folder. So it can, we could potentially create multiple Fiori applications inside our same project, structure them within the same app router. But I'll just go ahead and move that up there. And then your new project structure looks like this. You have app, then you have interaction items, you have this web app inside there, and here's all your content that was generated by the wizard, like the index HTML, the manifest, things like that. We don't really have to change anything because the wizard did all the work for us. So what can we do now? We can go ahead here to the command window, the console, and if I just do a Control-C, it stops it from running, and then I can do an npm start, and it will rerun it. And what we'll see here is when I open this, I want to show you something here real quick, just in case you would accidentally close this, and then you would say, oh, I don't know how to reopen the test in a new tab. I'm just going to show you while I'm in here a real quick little shortcut. If you come up here to the template, to the command palette, and you use ports preview, it will show you all of the possible things that you have running. And the active one is CAP running on port 4004. And you can just choose that, and it will do the same thing as that little dialog, opening it in a new browser tab for you. But the main thing that I wanted to show you here is that now we have interaction items web app index HTML in our web applications, and we can test this directly. Now, this is going to test it without actually going through the application router. This is just going to test it via the Cloud Application Programming Model endpoint itself, but it allows us to do a first test. So for instance, when I click on that, then you get brought here directly to the little list. Once again, not terribly exciting because we only have a few items here, a little bit of data, but for just running a wizard, it's a nice basic getting started UI. So I have the ability to go back there, or I could have ran the test HTML, and that would have taken me to a little test tool there. So what you've seen now is we created basically an end-to-end application that we have our data model, we have our service implementation, we have a little generated UI that uses that service, and probably more importantly, we put all the hooks in place to also set up real security on this as well, which we'll do in the next tutorial.